I discovered my sister and my fiancé together in my own apartment, wearing my engagement ring on her finger, with wedding invitations already printed in their names. When I confronted them, they laughed and said I should be grateful they waited until after my deployment to make it official. They had no idea what storm they had just unleashed, because what they didn't know was that I had spent 3 years as a JAG Corps attorney and I never lost a case. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments what time you're listening to this and where you are in the world, because I promise you'll want to hear how this ends. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Captain Alexandra Alex Moreau, and 6 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was 29 years old, recently returned from my second deployment overseas as a Judge Advocate General Corps attorney with the United States Army. My service record was impeccable, my legal expertise was respected throughout the military justice system, and I had successfully prosecuted some of the most complex cases in military courts across 3 different theaters of operation. The apartment I returned to in Fort Braxton was supposed to be our sanctuary. The place where my fiancé, David Chen, and I would build our life together after years of long-distance relationship challenges created by military deployments and demanding legal schedules. David worked as a civilian contractor for defense technology companies, which meant he understood the unique pressures of military life better than most civilian partners. Our relationship had survived 2 years of sporadic communication, missed holidays, and the constant uncertainty that accompanies military service. At least, I believed it had survived. The signs were there from the moment I stepped off the transport at the base airfield, but I was too exhausted and too eager to see David to recognize them immediately. 3 months of intensive legal work in overseas military courts had left me drained physically and emotionally. I had prosecuted cases involving everything from financial fraud to serious violent crimes, working 18-hour days in conditions that tested every aspect of my legal training and personal resilience. David's greeting at the airport felt different somehow, less enthusiastic than I had anticipated after months of separation. His embrace was brief, almost perfunctory, and when I searched his eyes for the warmth and relief I expected to see, I found something that looked more like guilt mixed with nervous energy. But I attributed these observations to my own fatigue and his adjustment to having me home again after managing his life independently for several months. The drive to our apartment was filled with conversation that felt strangely formal. David updated me on changes to his work situation, developments in his social circle, and renovations he had made to our living space during my absence. Everything he described sounded reasonable and thoughtful, but there was an underlying tension in his voice that I couldn't identify. He seemed to be providing information rather than sharing experiences, as if he were briefing a stranger rather than reuniting with someone he loved. My sister Catherine had always been the more traditionally beautiful one in our family, though we had followed completely different life paths. Where I had chosen military service and legal career demanding discipline and sacrifice, Catherine had pursued modeling and social media influence that emphasized appearance and lifestyle branding. She was 2 years younger than me but had always possessed a confidence about her attractiveness that I envied, even as I chose different priorities for my own development. Catherine lived in Charlotte, approximately 2 hours from Fort Braxton, and we had maintained a close relationship despite our different career choices and the demands of my military service. She had been genuinely supportive of my relationship with David, often commenting on how perfect we seemed together, and how happy she was that I had found someone who understood my commitment to military service. During my deployment, she had even offered to help David with anything he needed, from picking up packages to providing companionship when he felt lonely or overwhelmed by my absence. I should have recognized that offer for what it actually was. The first evening home, David seemed unusually interested in Catherine's activities and social media presence. He mentioned several times that she had been helpful during my deployment, bringing groceries when he was working long hours, joining him for dinners when he felt isolated, and even helping him select furniture for the apartment renovations he had completed. His gratitude seemed excessive for the kind of casual assistance that siblings typically provide, but I was focused on readjusting to civilian life and didn't examine his comments critically. The apartment itself had undergone significant changes during my absence. David had replaced furniture, rearranged entire rooms, and decorated with pieces that reflected aesthetic preferences I didn't recognize as either his or mine. When I asked about specific choices, he explained that Catherine had provided advice about color schemes and design elements because she had better taste than he did. The explanations were logical, but something about the apartment felt like it belonged to someone else rather than representing our shared space. Over the following weeks, I noticed patterns that should have alarmed me immediately. David received text messages at odd hours that he would read quickly before putting his phone face down. He made phone calls that he would end abruptly when I entered the room. His schedule included commitments that he described vaguely, and when I suggested joining him for social activities, he often explained that the plans had changed or been canceled. Most significantly, his physical affection had become mechanical and infrequent. The passion that had sustained our relationship through previous separations was replaced by obligatory gestures that felt more like duty than desire. When I attempted to initiate intimacy, he was responsive but distracted, as if his mind was occupied with concerns that he couldn't or wouldn't share with me. My military training had taught me to trust instincts about situations that didn't align with stated facts, but I fought against applying those analytical skills to my personal relationship. David was the person I planned to marry. Catherine was my sister and closest female relative. The possibility that they could be deceiving me seemed too devastating to consider seriously, so I rationalized every inconsistency and dismissed every warning sign. The engagement ring situation should have been my first definitive clue. I had removed it before deployment for security reasons, leaving it in our bedroom safe along with other valuable jewelry and important documents. When I returned, the ring wasn't in the safe where I had placed it. David explained that he had moved it to a different location for better security, but when I asked to see it, he said he needed to retrieve it from a safety deposit box that required scheduling a bank appointment. For 3 weeks, he provided various explanations for why that appointment kept being delayed or rescheduled. Work emergencies, bank system updates, scheduling conflicts with his travel requirements. Each excuse sounded reasonable individually, but the pattern created doubt that I couldn't ignore completely. A woman knows when something is wrong with her engagement ring situation, regardless of how logical the explanations might seem. The weekend that changed everything began like dozens of others since my return. David mentioned that he had work obligations that would keep him busy for most of Saturday and Sunday. I planned to use the time for personal errands and catching up on civilian life administrative tasks that had accumulated during my deployment. Catherine had mentioned wanting to visit soon, so I suggested she come for the weekend while David was occupied with his projects. Saturday morning, David left early and remained out of contact for most of the day. His absence felt different from previous weekends because he hadn't provided specific details about his work location or timeline for returning. When I tried calling him around noon, his phone went directly to voicemail. The message I left was casual, but internally I was beginning to feel the same alertness that preceded difficult legal cases when evidence didn't align with stated facts. Catherine arrived Saturday afternoon with an unusual amount of luggage for a weekend visit. She seemed nervous and excited simultaneously, exhibiting energy that reminded me of how she acted before major auditions or important social events. When I commented on her mood, she said she had exciting news to share but wanted to wait for the right moment. Her mysterious anticipation created an atmosphere of celebration that felt incongruous with my growing concerns about David's behavior. That evening, Catherine suggested we order dinner from the restaurant where David and I had our first date, claiming she wanted to hear more stories about our relationship. Her questions were more detailed than typical sisterly curiosity, focusing on specific aspects of our commitment to each other and future plans. She asked about wedding timeline, financial arrangements, and whether I had any doubts about David's faithfulness during my deployment. The last question struck me as inappropriate and concerning. When I asked why she would ask about faithfulness, Catherine became defensive and claimed she was simply trying to understand military relationship challenges better. Her explanation was reasonable, but something about her demeanor suggested she already knew more about my relationship dynamics than she was admitting. Sunday morning, I woke early and decided to surprise David by bringing him coffee at whatever work location was consuming his weekend. I realized I didn't actually know where he was supposed to be working, which seemed odd given that we lived together and shared most details about our schedules. When I looked through his desk for business cards or contact information that might indicate his current project location, I found receipts and documents that raised immediate questions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Restaurant charges for 2 people at establishments we had never visited together. Hotel reservations for dates that didn't correspond to any business travel he had mentioned. Most concerning, receipts for jewelry purchases from stores that specialized in engagement rings and wedding bands. The dates on these receipts span the entire period of my deployment, creating a timeline of activities that David had never discussed with me. My legal training had taught me to build cases through systematic evidence gathering rather than jumping to conclusions based on isolated facts. But the accumulation of inconsistencies was becoming too substantial to ignore. David's changed behavior, Catherine's mysterious excitement, the missing engagement ring, receipts for jewelry and romantic dinners, and his vague explanations for weekend work obligations were creating a pattern that pointed toward conclusion I was not prepared to accept. I decided to wait at the apartment for David to return, planning to confront him directly about the receipts and demand honest explanations for his recent behavior. Catherine was still asleep in the guest room, and I used the quiet morning hours to organize my thoughts and prepare for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. My military experience had taught me that direct confrontation often produced more reliable results than indirect questioning, especially when dealing with people who were actively concealing information. David returned to the apartment at approximately 11:30 a.m., using his key to enter quietly as if trying to avoid waking anyone. I was sitting in the living room, waiting for him with the receipts organized on the coffee table. When he saw me, his face immediately revealed recognition that his deception had been discovered. The guilt I had been observing for weeks became unmistakable panic. "Alex," he said, stopping in the doorway as if calculating whether he could retreat before I had opportunity to speak. "I didn't expect you to be awake yet." "I've been waiting for you," I replied, my voice carrying the controlled authority I used in military courtrooms when presenting evidence to hostile witnesses. "I think we need to discuss some things I found while you were at your mysterious work project." David's eyes moved to the receipts on the table, and I watched his expression change from panic to resignation. Whatever defense strategy he had prepared was clearly inadequate for explaining the evidence I had discovered. He stood silent for several moments, as if trying to formulate responses that might minimize the damage to his position. That was when Catherine emerged from the guest room, wearing a silk robe that I recognized as one David had given me for my birthday 2 years earlier. But what stopped my heart completely was what she wore on her left hand. My engagement ring, sparkling in the morning sunlight streaming through the living room windows. The silence that followed stretched into eternity, as all 3 of us recognized that pretense was no longer possible. Catherine looked at David with expression that combined apology and defiance. David looked at me with expression that combined shame and determination. I looked at both of them with expression that I knew they would never forget, because it was the same expression I wore when I destroyed opposing counsel in military courtrooms. "Catherine," I said, my voice deadly calm, "that's an interesting piece of jewelry you're wearing." She glanced down at her hand as if she had forgotten about the ring, then looked back at me with expression that attempted innocence but achieved only confirmation of guilt. "Alex, this isn't how we wanted you to find out," David said, stepping toward me with hands raised in gesture of placation that reminded me of defendants who knew their cases were hopeless but continued fighting anyway. "Find out what exactly?" quote, I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Sometimes in legal proceedings, you force people to state facts explicitly, rather than allowing them to hide behind implications and euphemisms. Why don't you explain to me exactly what I'm supposed to have found out?" Catherine finally spoke, and her words contained both cruelty and cowardice that revealed who she had always been beneath her supportive sister facade. "David and I fell in love while you were gone," she said, lifting her chin in defiant gesture that suggested she believed righteousness was on her side. "We tried to fight it, but we couldn't help ourselves. We're getting married." The announcement hit me like physical blow, but my military training prevented me from showing weakness that would give them satisfaction. Instead, I stood slowly, maintaining eye contact with both of them as I processed the magnitude of their betrayal and calculated my response strategy. "How long?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. "Since about a month after you deployed," David admitted, apparently deciding that honesty might somehow mitigate the damage to his reputation. "It wasn't planned, Alex. It just happened. Nothing just happens. People make choices, and David and Catherine had made deliberate choices to betray me systematically over a period of months. They had constructed elaborate deceptions, coordinated their stories, and planned their revelation for maximum impact. This wasn't spontaneous romance. This was calculated cruelty." "We were going to tell you," Catherine added, as if timing their announcement differently would have somehow reduced the impact of their betrayal. "We just needed to figure out the right way." "The right way," I repeated, my legal mind automatically analyzing their statements for inconsistencies and admissions that could be used against them later. "And you thought the right way was to let me find out by discovering my sister wearing my engagement ring in my own apartment." They exchanged glances that confirmed they had discussed this scenario and prepared joint responses. Their coordination indicated that this confrontation was not unexpected. They had been planning for this moment, which meant their betrayal was even more calculated than I had initially realized. "We should have told you sooner," David acknowledged, "but we knew it would hurt you, and we didn't want to cause pain while you were deployed and couldn't process it properly." The condescension in his explanation was breathtaking. They had betrayed me for months but justified their deception as protecting me from emotional distress that might interfere with my military duties. They had convinced themselves that their cruelty was actually kindness, their selfishness was actually consideration. "So you waited until I came home to spring this on me," I said. "How thoughtful." "Alex," Catherine said, stepping closer with expression that attempted sisterly affection but only emphasized her manipulation. "I know this is hard, but you'll understand eventually. David and I are better together than you two ever were. We have more in common, more shared interests, more natural compatibility." Her words were designed to wound me as deeply as possible, suggesting that my relationship with David had been inferior to theirs and that his preference for her was evidence of my inadequacy rather than their disloyalty. She wanted me to believe that David had upgraded from me to her, that their betrayal was actually David making a better choice about his future happiness. "And you thought you were entitled to make that determination for him," I said, without giving him the opportunity to choose between us honestly. "He did choose," Catherine replied with a smile that contained pure malice. "He chose me." The conversation continued for several more minutes, but the essential facts were established. David and Catherine had been conducting their relationship throughout my deployment. They had used my absence to build intimacy and plan their future together. They had coordinated their deception to prevent me from learning about their betrayal, until it was too late for me to interfere with their plans. Most importantly, they believed they had won. They thought that presenting me with accomplished facts would force me to accept their relationship and step aside gracefully. They expected me to be devastated but ultimately powerless to change the situation they had created. They had no idea what they had done. They didn't know that betraying a JAG Corps attorney who specialized in complex legal warfare was about to become the worst decision of their lives. They had just declared war on someone who had never lost a case and had access to legal resources they couldn't imagine. But I didn't tell them that yet. Instead, I smiled and told them I needed time to process everything they had shared with me. I suggested they might want to leave the apartment to give me space for reflection. I was calm, reasonable, and apparently accepting of their revelation. They left together, clearly relieved that I had not reacted with the dramatic emotion they had anticipated. As I watched them drive away from the apartment complex, I was already formulating the strategy that would teach them exactly what happened when someone tried to destroy a JAG Corps attorney's life. The war they had started was about to begin in earnest, and they had no idea what forces they had just unleashed against themselves. The silence that filled my apartment after David and Catherine departed felt charged with possibility rather than devastation. I stood at the living room window watching their car disappear into traffic and experienced something I had not felt since returning from deployment. Absolute clarity about my mission objectives and the resources available to accomplish them. My legal training had taught me that emotional reactions, while natural and valid, were tactical disadvantages when facing adversaries who expected them. David and Catherine had orchestrated their revelation to maximize my emotional distress, while minimizing their vulnerability to retaliation. They anticipated tears, pleading, or dramatic confrontation that would position them as reasonable people dealing with an unstable woman who could not accept reality gracefully. Instead, they had just provided a JAG core attorney with comprehensive evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and breach of fiduciary duty. Their coordinated deception during my military deployment had created legal vulnerabilities they were too inexperienced to recognize. More importantly, their assumption that I would accept defeat without resistance revealed they had no understanding of the professional capabilities they were challenging. I retrieved my laptop and began documenting everything I could remember about their behavior patterns since my return, their admissions during our confrontation, and the physical evidence I had discovered. Military legal proceedings require systematic evidence preservation, and civilian legal actions demand even more rigorous documentation standards. Every conversation, every receipt, every inconsistency in their stories would become ammunition for the campaign I was about to launch. The receipts David had hidden provided the foundation for establishing timeline and intent. Restaurant charges for 2 people throughout my deployment demonstrated ongoing romantic relationship rather than sudden attraction, they claimed. Hotel reservations during weekends when he told me he was working late proved deliberate deception designed to facilitate their affair. Most significantly, jewelry purchases during my absence indicated premeditation regarding marriage proposals and engagement, while I was still his official fiancé. But documentation was only the beginning. Effective legal strategy requires understanding the full scope of available remedies and selecting approaches that achieve maximum impact with minimum exposure to counterattack. I needed to inventory not just their vulnerabilities, but my assets, resources, and potential allies who could provide specialized expertise for different aspects of the campaign ahead. My JAG Corps experience had connected me with military attorneys specializing in every conceivable area of legal practice: criminal law, civil litigation, contract disputes, fraud investigation, asset recovery, and family law. More importantly, several of my closest colleagues had transitioned to civilian practice after completing their military service, establishing law firms that combined military precision with aggressive advocacy for clients who demanded results rather than mere representation. Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Torres had been my supervising attorney during my first deployment and remained one of my most trusted professional mentors. She had recently established a civilian practice in Atlanta, specializing in complex civil litigation for clients who required sophisticated legal strategies. Her firm handled cases involving corporate fraud, breach of contract, and asset recovery with success rates that made her one of the most sought-after litigators in the Southeast. Major James Morrison had served as military prosecutor for high-profile court-martial proceedings before transitioning to civilian criminal defense practice. His understanding of evidence preservation, witness interrogation, and courtroom advocacy made him invaluable for cases requiring aggressive investigation and strategic confrontation. His civilian clients included executives, entrepreneurs, and public figures who needed legal representation that combined military discipline with creative problem-solving. Captain Sarah Chen, no relation to David despite sharing his surname, specialized in family law and domestic relations with particular expertise in asset protection and divorce litigation. Her military background provided unique perspective on relationships involving deception, betrayal, and financial misconduct that made her exceptionally effective at achieving favorable outcomes for clients who discovered their partners had been engaging in systematic dishonesty. The 3 of them represented more than professional colleagues. They were people who understood my character, respected my capabilities, and would approach my situation with both personal loyalty and professional competence. More importantly, they were attorneys who approached legal challenges with military mentality that prioritized mission accomplishment over conventional civilian practices that emphasized negotiation and compromise. I placed my first call to Rebecca Torres at 9 o'clock Monday morning, reaching her directly rather than going through her administrative staff. Military colleagues maintain communication protocols that facilitate immediate access during crisis situations, and Rebecca answered my call with the same efficiency she had demonstrated throughout our service together. Alex, she said, recognizing my voice immediately. I heard you were back stateside. How are you adjusting to civilian life? I need legal advice, I replied without preliminary conversation. Personal situation involving fraud, breach of contract, and conspiracy. Are you available for consultation this week? Rebecca's tone shifted immediately to professional focus. What kind of time frame are we discussing for resolution? And what level of response are you considering? Complete and total, I said. I want to ensure this situation never happens to anyone else. And I want everyone involved to understand the consequences of their choices. Can you be in Atlanta tomorrow afternoon? Rebecca asked. I'll clear my schedule for comprehensive case evaluation. The drive to Atlanta provided opportunity for additional strategic planning and mental preparation. I used the 3-hour journey to contact James Morrison and Sarah Chen, arranging conference calls that would allow coordinated approach to different aspects of my situation. By the time I reached Rebecca's offices, I had preliminary legal team assembled and basic strategic framework outlined. Rebecca's law firm occupied the entire 40th floor of a downtown Atlanta high-rise, with views that encompassed the city's business district and beyond. Her personal office reflected military precision combined with civilian success. Awards and commendations from her JAG Corps service displayed alongside recognition for civilian legal achievements. The space communicated competence, achievement, and unwillingness to accept anything less than victory. Tell me everything, Rebecca said as we settled into the conference area adjacent to her desk. Start from the beginning and include every detail you can remember, regardless of how insignificant it might seem. I provided comprehensive briefing that covered David's behavior changes upon my return, Catherine's suspicious enthusiasm during her weekend visit, the evidence I had discovered, and the confrontation that revealed their systematic betrayal. Rebecca took notes throughout my presentation, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific dates, amounts, or statements that might have legal significance. When I finished my initial presentation, Rebecca reviewed her notes silently for several minutes before speaking. This isn't just personal betrayal, she said finally. This is fraud on multiple levels, breach of fiduciary duty and potentially criminal conspiracy depending on how they handled shared assets during your deployment. The fact that David accepted financial responsibilities as your domestic partner while conducting relationship with your sister creates legal exposure they probably haven't considered. She explained that civilian law provided numerous remedies for situations involving systematic deception in domestic relationships, particularly when one party was absent due to military service. Financial fraud, breach of trust, and conspiracy to conceal material facts created liability that extended beyond emotional damages to include punitive remedies designed to deter similar conduct. The question, Rebecca continued, is what outcome you want to achieve. Do you want financial compensation for damages? Do you want public accountability for their actions? Do you want to ensure they face consequences that prevent them from treating anyone else this way? All of the above, I replied without hesitation. But most importantly, I want them to understand that their actions have consequences they never anticipated. They thought they could destroy my life and walk away without accountability. I want to prove them wrong. Rebecca smiled with expression I recognized from our military service together when she was preparing to demolish opposing counsel in court-martial proceedings. Then we're going to war, she said. And we're going to win. The conference call with James Morrison and Sarah Chen took place that afternoon, with all 4 of us participating from Rebecca's office. The collaborative planning session lasted 3 hours and produced comprehensive legal strategy that addressed criminal, civil, and financial aspects of my situation while minimizing my exposure to counterattack or retaliation. James outlined the criminal law implications of David and Catherine's conduct, focusing on fraud, conspiracy, and potentially theft, depending on how they had handled shared assets during my deployment. While criminal prosecution would require district attorney cooperation, the evidence patterns suggested violations that could result in serious legal consequences, including fines, restitution, and possible incarceration. Sarah detailed the civil remedies available for breach of trust and fiduciary duty in domestic relationships, emphasizing that David's acceptance of financial responsibilities during my deployment created legal obligations that his affair with Catherine had violated. Her analysis indicated potential damages significantly exceeding the immediate financial costs of their betrayal. Rebecca coordinated overall strategy that would leverage criminal exposure to negotiate comprehensive civil resolution, while ensuring public accountability that would serve as warning to others considering similar conduct. The approach would demonstrate that betraying military personnel during deployment carries consequences that extend far beyond personal embarrassment. The legal team reached consensus that my situation represented pattern of conduct that needed decisive response both for personal justice and broader deterrent effect. David and Catherine had apparently assumed that military personnel were vulnerable targets for exploitation during deployment because they lacked immediate access to legal resources or ability to respond effectively to domestic betrayal. That assumption was about to prove catastrophically incorrect. Over the following week, each attorney initiated preliminary investigation and evidence gathering within their areas of expertise. James Morrison began criminal law analysis and coordination with district attorney offices that might have jurisdiction over fraud charges. Sarah Chen started civil case development, including asset investigation and damage assessment. Rebecca Torres coordinated overall strategy while beginning formal legal proceedings that would establish our serious intent to pursue all available remedies. The investigation revealed additional facts that demonstrated the systematic nature of David and Catherine's deception. Bank records showed that David had used joint credit accounts to finance his relationship with Catherine throughout my deployment, including expenses for romantic getaways, jewelry purchases, and apartment modifications that facilitated their affair. Financial analysis indicated that approximately $15,000 of shared resources had been diverted to support their relationship without my knowledge or consent. More significantly, property records revealed that David had initiated paperwork to remove my name from our joint lease agreement and add Catherine as authorized resident. The timing of these actions corresponded with my deployment schedule, indicating that they had been planning permanent arrangement while maintaining pretense that my relationship with David remained intact. Catherine's social media activity provided additional evidence of their timeline and intent. While she had been careful to avoid posting obvious evidence of romantic relationship with David, metadata analysis revealed location data that placed them together consistently throughout my deployment. More damaging, private messages between Catherine and her friends contained explicit discussions about her relationship with David and mockery of my ignorance about their affair. The evidence documented not just betrayal, but calculated cruelty, designed to maximize my emotional distress while minimizing their accountability. They had constructed elaborate deception that allowed them to enjoy their relationship, while ensuring I remained committed to arrangement they had already abandoned. Their planning demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how to exploit my military service obligations to facilitate their affair without immediate consequences. But their sophistication was tactical rather than strategic. They had succeeded in conducting their affair without immediate detection, but they had created extensive legal exposure that experienced attorneys could exploit comprehensively. Every credit card charge, every lease modification, every social media post, every private message had generated evidence that would support both criminal prosecution and civil liability. By Friday of that week, my legal team had assembled case files that documented systematic fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of shared assets, and conspiracy to conceal material facts. The evidence was comprehensive, the legal theories were sound, and the potential remedies were substantial. We were prepared to initiate formal legal proceedings that would demonstrate to David and Catherine that their actions carried consequences they had never imagined. The weekend arrival of formal legal documents would mark the beginning of their education about the difference between betraying a naive victim and betraying a JAG Corps attorney with unlimited access to military legal expertise. Their assumption that they could destroy my life without accountability was about to encounter reality that would reshape their understanding of consequences permanently. They had wanted war conducted in shadows with rules they controlled. They were about to discover what war looked like when conducted in daylight, with rules established by military legal professionals who specialized in achieving complete victory against adversaries who underestimated their capabilities. The strategic assessment was complete, the evidence was compiled, the legal team was assembled and prepared for comprehensive campaign. David and Catherine had enjoyed 3 months of believing they had successfully destroyed my life, while building their own happiness on foundation of my ignorance and pain. Their celebration was about to end abruptly, permanently, and completely. Monday morning arrived with the precision of a military operation, because that was exactly what it had become. Rebecca Torres had coordinated the simultaneous delivery of legal documents to both David and Catherine at their respective locations, ensuring they would receive formal notice of the consequences awaiting them at precisely 9 o'clock, when business hours commenced and legal proceedings could begin in earnest. The strategy required perfect timing and coordination across multiple jurisdictions. David would receive his documents at his workplace, ensuring maximum professional embarrassment while providing legal notice that could not be ignored or dismissed. Catherine would receive hers at her Charlotte residence, where the process server had been instructed to wait for personal service, regardless of any attempts to avoid accepting the papers. I positioned myself at Rebecca's Atlanta office to monitor the initial responses and coordinate next steps based on their reactions to discovering that their betrayal had generated serious legal consequences. The conference room had been converted into a command center with multiple phone lines, computer terminals displaying case management systems, and wall-mounted monitors showing real-time updates from our process servers and investigators. The first confirmation arrived at 9:15, when our Charlotte process server reported successful service on Catherine at her apartment. According to his detailed report, she had answered the door expecting a package delivery and instead received a comprehensive legal complaint that outlined fraud charges, civil conspiracy claims, and demands for financial restitution that would reshape her understanding of accountability permanently. Her initial reaction had been confusion, followed by panic as she read through documents that detailed systematic evidence of her coordinated deception during my deployment. The process server reported that she immediately attempted to call someone, presumably David, while asking repeatedly whether the legal papers were authentic or some kind of elaborate prank designed to frighten her. The second confirmation arrived at 9:37, when our Fort Braxton process server completed service on David at his office. The timing had been calculated to ensure Catherine would be unable to warn him about the incoming legal documents, preserving the shock value of simultaneous discovery that their actions had generated coordinated legal response from multiple attorneys in different jurisdictions. David's reaction had been markedly different from Catherine's panic. According to the process server, he had accepted the documents calmly, read through them quickly, and immediately requested privacy to make phone calls. His response indicated either greater understanding of legal implications or better emotional control under pressure, but both possibilities suggested he would be more difficult to intimidate through initial legal action alone. The complaints we had filed were comprehensive documents that established legal frameworks for both criminal prosecution and civil liability, while demanding immediate cessation of harmful conduct and preservation of evidence that might be relevant to ongoing proceedings. Each document had been crafted to demonstrate serious legal intent, while avoiding accusations that could not be proven definitively in court proceedings. The civil complaint against David outlined breach of fiduciary duty during our domestic partnership, conversion of shared assets for unauthorized purposes, fraud in the inducement regarding his intentions during my deployment, and conspiracy with Catherine to conceal material facts that affected my financial and personal decision-making. The damage calculations included both economic losses and punitive remedies designed to deter similar conduct in the future. Catherine's civil complaint focused on intentional interference with contractual relationships, civil conspiracy to defraud, and breach of family loyalty obligations that created legal duty to avoid causing foreseeable harm to family members through deceptive conduct. Her complaint also included invasion of privacy claims related to her access to personal information about my relationship through David that she had used to facilitate their affair. Beyond the civil proceedings, James Morrison had coordinated with the district attorney's office to initiate criminal investigation focusing on fraud charges that could result in felony convictions for both defendants. The criminal referral included detailed evidence of systematic financial deception, conspiracy to conceal material facts, and theft of shared resources that met statutory requirements for serious criminal prosecution. The initial legal strategy was designed to accomplish multiple objectives simultaneously. The civil complaints established legal frameworks for financial recovery while creating public records that would document their conduct permanently. The criminal referral demonstrated that their actions had consequences extending beyond personal embarrassment to include potential incarceration. Most importantly, the coordinated legal response sent clear message that betraying a JAG Corps attorney would result in comprehensive accountability rather than mere inconvenience. By 10:30 that morning, both David and Catherine had retained attorneys to respond to our legal actions. Their choice of representation provided valuable intelligence about their strategic approaches and financial resources available for extended litigation. David had hired Marcus Blackwell, a Charlotte-based attorney with experience in domestic relations and business litigation who charged premium rates for high-stakes cases. Catherine had retained Jennifer Walsh, a smaller firm practitioner who specialized in damage control for clients facing civil liability in personal matters. The quality of their legal representation confirmed that they understood the seriousness of their situation, while suggesting they possessed financial resources to mount meaningful defense against our claims. However, their choice to retain separate counsel rather than coordinating joint defense indicated underlying tensions about responsibility and strategy that we could potentially exploit through tactical legal maneuvering. Rebecca Torres initiated contact with both opposing attorneys that afternoon, establishing professional communication channels while making clear that our legal actions represented serious commitment to achieving comprehensive resolution, rather than negotiating positions designed to extract modest settlements. Her communications emphasized that we possessed extensive evidence and unlimited willingness to pursue all available remedies through whatever proceedings proved necessary. The response from David's attorney was professionally cautious, requesting additional time to review our allegations while suggesting that negotiated resolution might be preferable to extended litigation for all parties involved. His tone indicated recognition that our legal position was substantial, while maintaining that David's conduct, while perhaps morally questionable, might not satisfy all elements required for successful legal claims. Catherine's attorney adopted more aggressive stance, suggesting that our legal actions represented harassment motivated by romantic rejection rather than legitimate legal grievances requiring judicial resolution. Her response indicated either poor understanding of our evidence or tactical decision to portray Catherine as victim of vindictive former sister-in-law rather than perpetrator of systematic deception. The contrast between their legal strategies provided opportunity for divide-and-conquer tactics that could generate better outcomes than treating them as unified defendants with shared interests. David's apparent willingness to consider negotiated resolution could be leveraged to secure his cooperation in proceedings against Catherine, while her attorney's confrontational approach could be used to demonstrate unreasonableness that would influence judicial attitudes during formal proceedings. That evening, I received the first direct communication from either defendant when Catherine called my cell phone at approximately 8 o'clock. Her call was emotional rather than strategic, combining apology with justification in ways that revealed fundamental misunderstanding of legal implications surrounding her situation. "Alex, we need to talk," she began, her voice carrying mixture of tears and anger that suggested internal conflict about whether to approach me as victim or adversary. "This legal stuff is crazy. We can work this out between ourselves without involving lawyers and courts and all this official nonsense." "Catherine," I replied, maintaining professional demeanor despite personal satisfaction at hearing panic in her voice, "you made decisions that created legal consequences. Those consequences cannot be resolved through sisterly conversation or emotional appeals." She continued talking for several minutes, alternating between apology for hurting me and justification for her relationship with David based on their natural compatibility and my alleged emotional unavailability due to military service commitments. Her arguments revealed that she still believed the primary issue was my hurt feelings rather than systematic fraud and conspiracy that had generated legitimate legal claims. "You're destroying our family over this," Catherine said, apparently believing that family relationships created immunity from accountability for fraud and betrayal. "Mom and Dad are going to be devastated when they find out you're suing your own sister over relationship drama. Our parents will be devastated when they understand that their daughter conducted systematic conspiracy to defraud her sister while she was deployed overseas serving her country," I replied. "But they will also understand that actions have consequences and that military personnel cannot be targeted for exploitation without legal accountability." The conversation continued for another 15 minutes before Catherine realized that emotional manipulation would not succeed in convincing me to withdraw legal actions that threatened her financial security and public reputation. Her final statement before ending the call revealed both her desperation and her continued misunderstanding of the situation she had created. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice combining threat with pleading in ways that suggested she remained unable to distinguish between legal reality and personal drama. "David loves me, not you. Destroying us won't bring him back or make you feel better about losing him." "This isn't about David," I replied truthfully. "This is about ensuring that people who commit fraud and conspiracy face appropriate consequences for their choices. David is welcome to love whoever he chooses, but he cannot commit financial fraud to facilitate those relationships without legal accountability." The phone call provided valuable evidence that Catherine remained focused on emotional aspects of the situation, rather than legal implications of her conduct. Her inability to understand the distinction between personal heartbreak and criminal fraud would make her vulnerable to legal strategies that exploited her emotional reactions, rather than addressing rational business considerations. Over the following week, our legal team received formal responses from both opposing attorneys that confirmed their strategic approaches, while providing additional information about their defenses and potential settlement positions. David's attorney submitted detailed response that acknowledged factual accuracy of many of our allegations, while disputing legal interpretations and damage calculations that might result from civil litigation. His response included offer to negotiate comprehensive settlement that would include financial restitution for documented economic losses, formal apology for deceptive conduct, and agreement to refrain from future contact or interference with my personal and professional activities. The settlement offer represented significant admission of liability while attempting to limit financial exposure and avoid public proceedings that could damage his professional reputation. Catherine's attorney submitted response that denied virtually all factual allegations, while characterizing our legal actions as harassment motivated by romantic disappointment, rather than legitimate legal grievances requiring judicial intervention. Her response included counterclaims alleging defamation, harassment, and abuse of legal process that were clearly designed to create negotiating leverage rather than serious legal challenges to our position. The contrast between their responses confirmed our assessment that David possessed better understanding of legal reality, while Catherine remained committed to emotional narrative that portrayed her as victim rather than perpetrator. These different approaches created opportunity for strategic maneuvering that could achieve better outcomes than unified opposition might have allowed. Rebecca Torres recommended accepting David's settlement offer as foundation for broader resolution, while continuing aggressive prosecution of claims against Catherine until she demonstrated willingness to acknowledge responsibility for her conduct and provide appropriate restitution. This approach would eliminate David as source of financial support for Catherine's legal defense, while demonstrating that reasonable defendants could avoid extended litigation through appropriate accountability. However, I made a decision that surprised my legal team by rejecting David's settlement offer, despite its financial advantages and strategic benefits. My decision was based on understanding that accepting negotiated resolution would send message that military personnel could be exploited through systematic deception, as long as perpetrators eventually offered appropriate financial compensation for their crimes. "This isn't about money," I explained during strategy conference with my legal team. "This is about establishing that betraying deployed military personnel carries consequences severe enough to deter similar conduct in the future. If David settles quietly while maintaining his professional reputation and personal relationships, other people might conclude that military spouses and partners are vulnerable targets for exploitation during deployment." My decision to reject settlement and pursue comprehensive legal action through formal proceedings represented commitment to broader principles beyond personal justice. Military families make extraordinary sacrifices for national service, and those sacrifices create vulnerabilities that civilian criminals should not be permitted to exploit without facing severe legal consequences. The legal team agreed to pursue aggressive litigation strategy that would demonstrate public accountability rather than private resolution, sending clear message that systematic fraud against military personnel would result in consequences severe enough to serve as effective deterrent for potential future offenders. David and Catherine had initiated hostilities, believing they possessed advantages of surprise, preparation, and victim, who lacked immediate access to legal resources due to military deployment obligations. They were about to discover that military legal professionals approach warfare differently than civilian practitioners, with commitment to total victory that left no doubt about consequences of choosing military families as targets for criminal exploitation. The second week of formal legal proceedings revealed the fundamental difference between military strategic thinking and civilian crisis management. While David and Catherine had retained competent attorneys and developed defensive strategies appropriate for typical domestic disputes, they remained unprepared for the systematic pressure campaign that Rebecca Torres had designed to exploit every vulnerability their conduct had created. Military legal strategy operates on the principle that sustained pressure across multiple fronts prevents adversaries from developing effective countermeasures while forcing them to expend resources defending positions that become increasingly untenable over time. Rather than pursuing single dramatic confrontation, our approach involved coordinated actions that created cascading consequences designed to demonstrate the full scope of accountability they would face. James Morrison initiated the first phase by filing criminal complaints with both the district attorney's office in Mecklenburg County, where Catherine resided, and Cumberland County, where David's workplace was located. The criminal referrals included comprehensive evidence packages that documented systematic fraud, conspiracy to conceal material facts, and theft of shared resources that satisfied statutory requirements for felony prosecution in both jurisdictions. The criminal complaints served multiple strategic purposes beyond potential prosecution. They created public records that established factual foundations for civil proceedings while generating official documentation that would influence insurance coverage, employment decisions, and professional licensing considerations. Most importantly, criminal exposure created psychological pressure that civilian attorneys could not alleviate through conventional legal defense strategies. Simultaneously, Sarah Chen filed detailed asset preservation motions that froze bank accounts, credit facilities, and investment holdings, pending resolution of fraud claims that could result in substantial restitution obligations. The asset freezes prevented David and Catherine from dissipating resources that might be required to satisfy eventual judgments, while demonstrating that their financial security was directly threatened by legal consequences of their conduct. The asset preservation actions had immediate practical impact that transformed abstract legal threats into concrete daily inconvenience. David discovered that his primary credit cards had been suspended when he attempted to purchase lunch at his workplace cafeteria. Catherine found that her bank accounts were inaccessible when she tried to withdraw funds for routine expenses, forcing her to request emergency financial assistance from our parents. Our legal team had anticipated that asset freezes would generate family pressure for negotiated resolution, but I had prepared our parents for these developments through comprehensive briefing about the evidence and legal strategy. Their initial reaction had been shock and disappointment, but after reviewing documentation we had compiled, they understood that Catherine and David had engaged in conduct that required accountability regardless of family relationships. The third component of our pressure campaign involved professional consequences that extended beyond immediate legal proceedings. James Morrison had coordinated with military personnel offices to ensure that David's security clearance underwent mandatory review based on criminal fraud allegations that could affect his eligibility for defense contractor employment. The security clearance investigation would examine his conduct independently of civilian legal proceedings while creating employment vulnerabilities that negotiated settlements could not resolve. Catherine faced different professional consequences related to her social media influence career that depended entirely on public perception and brand partnerships with companies that required wholesome image from their sponsored content creators. Rebecca Torres had strategically released information about pending legal proceedings to industry publications that covered social media marketing, ensuring that Catherine's brand partners understood the reputational risks associated with continued business relationships. The professional consequences were designed to demonstrate that systematic fraud against military personnel created accountability that extended far beyond immediate legal liability to affect long-term career prospects and financial security. David and Catherine had apparently assumed that private betrayal could remain private regardless of legal proceedings, but our strategy ensured that their conduct became professional liability that would influence their earning capacity permanently. By the end of the second week, both defendants were experiencing daily reminders that that their decision to betray a JAG court attorney had generated consequences that affected every aspect of their lives, rather than creating isolated inconvenience they could manage through legal representation and emotional resilience. The psychological impact of sustained pressure became evident through increasingly desperate communication attempts from both defendants and their families. Catherine's mother, my Aunt Patricia, called me directly to request family meeting that would allow negotiated resolution without continued legal proceedings that were causing distress for everyone involved in the extended family network. "Alexandra, this situation is tearing our family apart," Patricia said during our conversation, her voice carrying exhaustion that suggested she had been mediating between various family members who held different opinions about appropriate response to the crisis. "Catherine made terrible decisions, but destroying her life will not repair the damage or make anyone feel better about what happened." "Aunt Patricia," I replied, maintaining respectful tone while ensuring clarity about my position. "Catherine and David made calculated decisions to commit fraud and conspiracy against me while I was deployed overseas serving our country. Those decisions created legal consequences that cannot be resolved through family mediation or emotional appeals." Patricia continued advocating for family resolution that would avoid public proceedings and professional consequences that she believed were disproportionate to the personal nature of the conflict. Her arguments reflected common misconception that betrayal between family members should be handled privately regardless of legal implications or systematic nature of deceptive conduct. "But she is your sister," Patricia emphasized, apparently believing that family relationships created immunity from accountability for criminal behavior. "Family forgiveness is more important than legal victories that will create permanent damage to relationships you will need throughout your life. Family relationships require trust and honesty," I responded. "Catherine violated those principles systematically while I was deployed, and she must face appropriate consequences for her choices. Forgiving her without accountability would send a message that military families are acceptable targets for exploitation by people who claim to love them." The conversation revealed that extended family members had been receiving pressure from Catherine and David to intervene on their behalf, creating division within family networks that had previously provided support and stability. Their attempt to manipulate family relationships to avoid legal accountability demonstrated continued commitment to deceptive strategies rather than acceptance of responsibility for their conduct. David's communication attempts were more sophisticated, involving his attorney in formal settlement discussions that included substantial financial offers combined with comprehensive non-disclosure agreements designed to prevent public revelation of the evidence we had compiled. His latest settlement proposal included restitution payments totaling $50,000 plus formal apology and agreement to avoid future contact or interference with my personal and professional activities. This settlement offer represented significant increase from his initial proposal, while including provisions that demonstrated his understanding that financial compensation alone would not resolve all consequences of his conduct. However, the non-disclosure requirements confirmed that he remained primarily concerned with protecting his reputation rather than accepting genuine accountability for systematic fraud he had committed. Rebecca Torres advised that David's latest settlement offer was financially generous and legally sufficient to resolve most claims we had filed against him, but she understood my commitment to establishing precedent that would deter similar conduct against other military personnel and their families. David's offer represents substantial financial recovery, Rebecca explained during our strategy meeting. But accepting settlement with non-disclosure provisions would prevent us from using this case as public example of consequences for betraying deployed military personnel. The decision ultimately depends on whether you prioritize personal compensation or broader impact. My decision to reject David's enhanced settlement offer was based on recognition that accepting private resolution would limit the deterrent effect our case could have on potential future offenders who might view military deployment as opportunity to exploit vulnerable spouses and partners without serious consequences. Military families make extraordinary sacrifices for national security, I explained to my legal team. Those sacrifices create vulnerabilities that criminals should not be permitted to exploit through private settlements that protect their reputations and career prospects. David and Catherine need to face public accountability that will serve as warning to anyone considering similar conduct. The rejection of David's settlement offer marked strategic decision to pursue comprehensive legal victory rather than negotiated resolution. demonstrating commitment to principles that extended beyond personal benefit to include protection for military families who might face similar exploitation in the future. The third week of legal proceedings introduced additional pressure through discovery motions that required David and Catherine to produce comprehensive documentation about their financial activities, communication records, and personal relationships throughout my deployment period. The discovery requests were designed to uncover additional evidence while creating administrative burden that would consume their time and resources. Discovery proceedings in civil litigation allow extensive investigation of defendant conduct that can reveal information extending far beyond original allegations, creating opportunities to identify additional legal claims or sources of accountability that were not apparent during initial case development. The discovery process also creates psychological pressure by forcing defendants to confront comprehensive documentation of their conduct while anticipating hostile examination under oath. David's discovery responses revealed additional financial misconduct that exceeded our initial damage calculations, including use of joint credit facilities to purchase engagement ring for Catherine, vacation expenses for romantic getaways during my deployment, and apartment renovation costs that were designed to facilitate their cohabitation while maintaining pretense that he remained committed to our relationship. Catherine's discovery responses contained numerous inconsistencies and obvious omissions that created additional legal exposure for perjury and obstruction of justice if she maintained false statements during formal deposition proceedings. Her attempts to minimize her role in systematic deception while claiming ignorance about David's financial fraud generated evidence that could be used to impeach her credibility during trial proceedings. The discovery process also revealed that David and Catherine had attempted to coordinate their stories through shared attorney consultation, despite retaining separate legal representation, creating potential ethical violations that could result in sanctions against their attorneys, while providing additional evidence of ongoing conspiracy to conceal material facts. By the end of the third week, our legal strategy had created pressure across criminal, civil, professional, and family dimensions that demonstrated the comprehensive nature of accountability they would face for their decision to betray a JAG Corps attorney during deployment. Their initial confidence that they could manage legal consequences through conventional defense strategies was being replaced by recognition that they faced systematic campaign designed to ensure complete accountability. The psychological toll was becoming evident through increasingly erratic behavior and communication patterns that suggested their emotional stability was deteriorating under sustained legal pressure. Catherine had contacted our parents multiple times requesting financial assistance for legal fees, while expressing paranoid concerns that we were monitoring her communications and activities beyond the scope of legitimate legal proceedings. David had begun missing work commitments and demonstrated declining performance that his employer attributed to personal stress affecting his professional capabilities. His security clearance review was proceeding independently of our civil litigation, creating employment vulnerabilities that could result in termination regardless of civil case outcomes. Their recognition that legal consequences would extend beyond immediate proceedings to affect their long-term career prospects and financial security was generating desperation that would soon force them to choose between continued resistance and acceptance of accountability that would end their legal exposure while providing justice for their systematic betrayal. The pressure campaign was achieving its strategic objectives by demonstrating that betraying deployed military personnel carried consequences severe enough to serve as effective deterrent for potential future offenders, while ensuring that David and Catherine faced appropriate accountability for their calculated decision to exploit my military service obligations to facilitate their systematic deception. The fourth week of proceedings brought the first clear indication that David and Catherine's defensive strategy was collapsing under the systematic pressure our legal team had maintained across multiple fronts. Their initial confidence that competent legal representation could minimize consequences for their conduct was being replaced by growing recognition that they faced accountability far exceeding anything their civilian attorneys had prepared them to handle. The catalyst for this realization came through simultaneous developments in both criminal and civil proceedings that demonstrated the comprehensive nature of exposure they had created through their systematic deception during my deployment. James Morrison received confirmation from the district attorney's office that criminal fraud charges would be formally filed against both defendants, while Rebecca Torres obtained court approval for asset seizure motions that would secure additional resources pending resolution of civil claims. Criminal prosecution represented escalation beyond civil liability that neither defendant had anticipated when they retained attorneys to handle what they initially viewed as harassment litigation, motivated by romantic disappointment. The prosecutor's decision to pursue felony charges validated our evidence, while creating legal consequences that could include substantial fines, restitution obligations, and potential incarceration that settlement negotiations could not resolve. David's security clearance review had progressed to formal investigation status that required comprehensive background examination, including interviews with colleagues, supervisors, and personal contacts regarding his character and trustworthiness. The investigation process was generating professional attention that threatened his employment regardless of criminal case outcomes. Since defense contractors cannot retain employees who pose security risks due to demonstrated patterns of deceptive conduct, Catherine faced different but equally serious professional consequences, as brand partners began terminating sponsorship agreements based on negative publicity surrounding her legal troubles. Social media influence careers depend entirely on public perception and corporate willingness to associate their products with personalities who maintain positive reputations, making her criminal charges and civil liability particularly damaging to her earning capacity. The convergence of criminal exposure, professional consequences, and ongoing civil proceedings created pressure that exceeded their emotional and financial resources to maintain effective resistance. Their attorneys were reporting increasing difficulty coordinating coherent defense strategies, as both defendants demonstrated declining ability to participate rationally in legal decision-making processes. Catherine's emotional deterioration became evident through increasingly erratic communication attempts with family members who had previously provided support and encouragement. She called our mother multiple times daily with conflicting requests for advice, financial assistance, and intervention that would somehow resolve her legal troubles without requiring acknowledgement of responsibility for her conduct. During one particularly revealing conversation with our mother, Catherine expressed paranoid concerns that we were engaged in surveillance and harassment activities beyond legitimate legal proceedings. She claimed that unfamiliar vehicles had been observed near her apartment and that she suspected her communications were being monitored through methods that extended beyond court-authorized discovery processes. Our mother contacted me directly to express concern about Catherine's mental state while acknowledging that the legal proceedings were justified based on evidence that had been shared with family members. Her conversation revealed that Catherine had been pressuring family members to intervene on her behalf, while simultaneously expressing resentment toward anyone who suggested she should accept responsibility for her choices. "Alexandra, I understand why you are pursuing legal action," our mother said during our conversation. "But I am worried that Catherine is having some kind of breakdown that might require professional mental health intervention rather than continued legal pressure." "Mother," I replied, maintaining appropriate respect while ensuring clarity about boundaries. Catherine's emotional distress results from facing consequences for deliberate choices she made over several months. Professional counseling might help her cope with accountability, but it cannot substitute for legal resolution of fraud and conspiracy charges. The conversation highlighted important distinction between sympathy for emotional distress and acceptance of responsibility for criminal conduct. Catherine's psychological difficulties were understandable responses to facing serious legal consequences, but they did not alter the factual evidence or legal obligations that her conduct had created. David's response to mounting pressure was more calculating but equally revealing about his character under stress. Rather than accepting responsibility for systematic deception he had orchestrated, he began developing defensive strategy that minimized his role, while suggesting that Catherine had been primary instigator of their relationship and subsequent cover-up activities. His attorney submitted supplemental pleadings that characterized David as victim of manipulation by Catherine, who had exploited his loneliness during my deployment to initiate romantic relationship that he later found difficult to terminate. The pleadings suggested that Catherine had threatened to reveal their affair unless David continued the relationship and supported her financially, creating coercion that explained his participation in deceptive conduct. This defensive strategy represented fundamental betrayal of Catherine that demonstrated David's willingness to sacrifice anyone, including someone he claimed to love, to protect himself from legal accountability. His attempt to portray Catherine as manipulative aggressor while presenting himself as reluctant victim revealed character flaws that extended beyond his betrayal of our relationship. Rebecca Torres recognized David's defensive strategy as opportunity to exploit division between defendants who were now pursuing conflicting interests rather than coordinating unified defense. His willingness to blame Catherine for systematic deception they had implemented together created evidence that could be used against both defendants while potentially securing his cooperation in proceedings against Catherine. David is throwing Catherine under the bus to save himself, Rebecca explained during our strategy meeting. His characterization of her as a manipulative predator creates admissions about their systematic deception while providing evidence we can use to prove conspiracy charges against both defendants. The strategic value of David's betrayal of Catherine was significant, because it eliminated any possibility that they could present unified defense based on mutual affection that had overcome their better judgment. Instead, their conflicting narratives created evidence of calculated deception that satisfied legal requirements for conspiracy and fraud charges, while demonstrating ongoing willingness to deceive authorities about their conduct. Catherine's attorney responded to David's defensive strategy with counterclaims alleging that he had initiated their relationship through systematic grooming that exploited her trust and family loyalty while she was providing emotional support during my deployment. Her pleadings characterized David as predatory manipulator who had taken advantage of her kindness to create romantic relationship that she later felt unable to terminate due to family complications. The mutual accusations between defendants created comprehensive documentation of their systematic deception, while eliminating any possibility that either could credibly claim ignorance about wrongfulness of their conduct. Their willingness to betray each other under legal pressure demonstrated the superficial nature of their alleged love, while providing evidence that would support maximum penalties for their crimes. During the fifth week of proceedings, James Morrison received authorization from the prosecutor's office to offer cooperation agreements to both defendants that would reduce criminal charges in exchange for comprehensive testimony about their conduct and assistance in developing educational materials about military family exploitation that could be used for prevention purposes. The cooperation agreements represented strategic opportunity to achieve broader objectives beyond punishment of individual defendants by creating resources that would help protect other military families from similar exploitation. However, the agreements required both defendants to acknowledge full responsibility for their conduct while providing detailed testimony about their decision-making processes throughout the deception period. David's attorney expressed immediate interest in cooperation discussions that might resolve criminal exposure while limiting damage to his security clearance and professional reputation. His willingness to cooperate represented pragmatic recognition that continued resistance would likely result in more severe consequences than negotiated resolution that included accountability but preserved some prospects for career recovery. Catherine's attorney initially rejected cooperation discussions while maintaining defensive posture that denied substantive wrongdoing and characterized legal proceedings as harassment motivated by vindictive family dynamics. Her continued resistance reflected either poor legal advice or psychological inability to accept responsibility for systematic fraud she had participated in willingly. The divergent responses to cooperation opportunities created additional strategic advantages by allowing us to secure David's testimony against Catherine while demonstrating her unreasonableness to judicial authorities who would ultimately determine appropriate penalties for her conduct. David's willingness to cooperate also provided leverage for obtaining more comprehensive admissions about their systematic deception. By the end of the fifth week, the pressure campaign had achieved its primary objective of forcing both defendants to confront the reality that their legal exposure extended far beyond inconvenient civil litigation to include serious criminal charges, professional consequences, and family disruption that would affect their lives permanently regardless of case outcomes. Catherine's emotional deterioration had progressed to the point where she required professional counseling to cope with stress and anxiety that were affecting her ability to participate effectively in legal proceedings. Her attorney requested postponement of deposition schedules to allow mental health treatment that might restore her capacity for rational decision-making about cooperation discussions. David's pragmatic approach to managing legal exposure through cooperation agreements represented acknowledgement that his initial defensive strategy had failed to prevent accountability for his conduct. His willingness to testify against Catherine demonstrated that their alleged love relationship could not survive pressure of serious legal consequences, revealing the superficial nature of commitment that had motivated their betrayal of family relationships. The breaking point had been achieved through systematic application of legal pressure that exceeded their emotional and financial resources to maintain effective resistance. Their recognition that continued fighting would result in more severe consequences than negotiated accountability created opportunity for resolution that would provide justice while establishing precedent for future cases involving military family exploitation. The transition from defensive resistance to cooperation discussions marked a fundamental shift in case dynamics that would soon force both defendants to choose between continued legal exposure through futile resistance and acceptance of comprehensive accountability that would end their legal troubles while providing appropriate consequences for their systematic betrayal of trust and family loyalty. The transition from adversarial litigation to cooperation discussions required careful strategic planning to ensure that any negotiated resolution would achieve comprehensive accountability while providing meaningful deterrent effect for potential future offenders. Rebecca Torres coordinated with James Morrison and Sarah Chen to develop negotiation framework that would address criminal exposure, civil liability, and professional consequences in ways that served both justice and prevention objectives. The cooperation agreements we were prepared to offer represented significant departure from conventional plea bargaining that typically focuses solely on reducing criminal penalties in exchange for admission of guilt. Our framework required comprehensive acknowledgement of systematic deception, detailed testimony about decision-making processes that led to their betrayal, financial restitution that exceeded documented damages, and participation in educational initiatives designed to protect military families from similar exploitation. David's attorney initiated formal cooperation discussions by requesting comprehensive outline of terms that would resolve all pending legal actions, while providing his client with clear understanding of obligations and benefits associated with negotiated settlement. His approach demonstrated professional recognition that continued resistance would likely result in more severe consequences than negotiated accountability, that included substantial penalties, but preserved some prospects for eventual career recovery. The initial cooperation proposal we presented to David included several components designed to achieve multiple objectives simultaneously. Criminal charges would be reduced from felony fraud to misdemeanor conspiracy, in exchange for comprehensive guilty plea that acknowledged systematic nature of his deceptive conduct. Civil liability would be resolved through restitution payments totaling $75,000 that reflected both documented damages and punitive assessment designed to deter similar conduct. Professional consequences would include voluntary resignation from his current position with defense contractor, surrender of security clearance pending comprehensive review by military personnel authorities, and agreement to disclose criminal conviction to future employers in positions requiring trust or fiduciary responsibility. These professional restrictions were designed to ensure that his conduct would have lasting career implications while not permanently destroying his ability to earn living through honest employment. The cooperation agreement also required David to provide detailed sworn testimony about the systematic deception he and Catherine had implemented during my deployment, including specific information about financial fraud, coordination of false statements, and psychological manipulation techniques they had used to maintain cover-up while I remained overseas. This testimony would be recorded for use in educational materials and future legal proceedings involving similar conduct. Most significantly, David would be required to participate in educational presentations for military personnel and their families about warning signs of exploitation during deployment and resources available for prevention and response. These presentations would transform his personal accountability into broader service that would help protect other military families from experiencing similar betrayal. David's attorney reviewed our cooperation proposal for 3 days before requesting modifications that would reduce some professional restrictions, while maintaining criminal and civil accountability that addressed the core harm his client had caused. His proposed modifications focused primarily on preserving some possibility for eventual security clearance restoration and reducing the scope of required educational participation. Rebecca Torres responded that professional consequences reflected the severity of David's breach of trust with someone who was serving overseas and could not be significantly reduced without undermining the deterrent effect our case was designed to achieve. However, she indicated willingness to consider modified timeline for security clearance restrictions that would allow eventual restoration based on demonstrated rehabilitation and community service. The negotiation process revealed David's genuine recognition that his conduct had been fundamentally wrong and his apparent commitment to accepting appropriate accountability rather than continuing futile resistance. His attorney reported that David expressed sincere remorse for his betrayal, and understanding that comprehensive accountability was necessary to restore any possibility of maintaining relationships with family members who had been affected by his deceptive conduct. Catherine's situation presented more complex challenges because her continued resistance to accepting responsibility prevented meaningful cooperation discussions, while her deteriorating mental health created questions about her capacity to participate effectively in negotiated resolution. Her attorney reported that she remained committed to defensive narrative that minimized her role while characterizing legal proceedings as harassment motivated by vindictive family dynamics. The psychological evaluation that Catherine's attorney had requested revealed significant anxiety and depression that were affecting her judgment and decision-making capacity, but the evaluation also confirmed that she retained sufficient mental competency to understand legal proceedings and make informed decisions about cooperation versus continued resistance. Her emotional distress resulted from facing accountability rather than mental illness that would excuse her from legal responsibility. James Morrison recommended proceeding with cooperation discussions that included mental health treatment as component of negotiated resolution, while maintaining firm requirements for acknowledgement of responsibility and comprehensive accountability. The modified approach would provide Catherine with professional support for managing emotional consequences of her choices, while ensuring that psychological difficulties did not prevent appropriate legal resolution. The cooperation proposal presented to Catherine included criminal charge reduction from felony conspiracy to misdemeanor fraud in exchange for comprehensive guilty plea, and detailed testimony about her participation in systematic deception during my deployment. Civil liability would be resolved through restitution payments totaling $50,000 that reflected her somewhat lesser role in financial fraud, while acknowledging her primary responsibility for emotional manipulation and family betrayal. Professional consequences for Catherine focused on restrictions related to social media influence activities that had generated income through brand partnerships requiring positive public reputation. The cooperation agreement would require disclosure of criminal conviction to existing and future business partners, while prohibiting representation of herself as trustworthy family member or relationship advisor through any commercial activities. Catherine would also be required to participate in educational initiatives designed to help military families recognize warning signs of exploitation by individuals who use family relationships or personal connections to facilitate systematic deception during deployment periods. Her participation would include recorded testimony about psychological techniques she had used to manipulate family trust while conducting affair with my fiancé. The educational component of Catherine's cooperation agreement was particularly important, because her role as family member who had exploited sister relationship created different warning signs and prevention strategies than cases involving external predators who target military families through professional or social connections. Her testimony would help develop resources specifically addressing betrayal by trusted family members during deployment. Catherine's attorney initially rejected our cooperation proposal, while requesting modifications that would eliminate most professional restrictions and reduce financial restitution to nominal amounts that acknowledged wrongdoing without creating substantial economic consequences. Her position continued to reflect fundamental misunderstanding of the seriousness of systematic fraud and conspiracy charges she faced. Rebecca Torres responded that Catherine's proposed modifications were insufficient to address the harm her conduct had caused, while failing to provide meaningful deterrent effect that would protect other military families from similar exploitation. She emphasized that cooperation agreements must include accountability proportionate to the systematic nature of deception that had been documented through comprehensive evidence. The negotiation process extended through the 6th week of proceedings, as Catherine's attorney attempted to develop alternative proposals that would satisfy legal requirements while minimizing consequences for his client. However, each proposed modification revealed Catherine's continued reluctance to accept full responsibility for her role in systematic betrayal that had damaged family relationships and violated trust that military deployment requires. During this period, David completed his cooperation agreement and began providing detailed testimony about the systematic deception he and Catherine had implemented during my deployment. His testimony revealed additional information about coordination and planning that supported enhanced charges against Catherine, while providing valuable insights for educational materials being developed to protect military families. David's testimony included specific details about how Catherine had initiated their romantic relationship through manipulation of family loyalty and his emotional vulnerability during my deployment. He described systematic process through which she had convinced him that I was emotionally unavailable due to military commitments, and that their relationship represented natural evolution of compatibility that had always existed beneath family connections. The testimony also revealed Catherine's role in developing cover-up strategies that included coordination of false statements, management of financial fraud, and psychological manipulation designed to prevent discovery of their affair, while maintaining facade that my relationship with David remained intact. Her systematic approach to deception demonstrated sophisticated understanding of exploitation techniques rather than spontaneous romantic attraction that had overcome better judgment. Most significantly, David's testimony documented Catherine's explicit statements about her belief that military personnel were vulnerable targets for exploitation during deployment because they lacked immediate access to family support systems and legal resources necessary for effective response to domestic betrayal. Her comments revealed predatory mindset that viewed my military service as opportunity rather than sacrifice deserving respect and protection. The comprehensive nature of David's cooperation provided prosecution with evidence that exceeded original charges while creating foundation for educational materials that would help military families recognize and respond to exploitation attempts by individuals who target deployment periods for systematic deception and fraud. By the end of the 6th week, David had completed his cooperation obligations and received confirmation that criminal charges would be reduced as agreed, while civil liability would be resolved through restitution payments that would begin immediately and continue for 18 months until full accountability was achieved. Catherine remained in negotiation discussions with increasing pressure from criminal prosecutors who were prepared to proceed with felony charges if cooperation agreement could not be reached within reasonable timeframe. Her attorney reported growing recognition that continued resistance would result in more severe consequences than negotiated accountability that included comprehensive penalties but avoided maximum criminal sanctions. The negotiation process had achieved its strategic objective of securing David's complete cooperation, while demonstrating to Catherine that her only viable options were acceptance of comprehensive accountability through cooperation agreement or facing maximum criminal penalties through trial proceedings that would likely result in conviction based on overwhelming evidence and David's testimony. The systematic approach to cooperation negotiations had transformed initial adversarial litigation into educational opportunity that would provide lasting protection for military families while ensuring that both defendants faced appropriate consequences for their systematic betrayal of trust and family loyalty during my deployment overseas. The 7th week of proceedings brought Catherine to the inevitable crossroads that our legal strategy had been designed to create. Her attorney, Jennifer Walsh, requested an emergency meeting with our legal team to discuss final cooperation terms after receiving notification that the district attorney's office would proceed with felony prosecution if no agreement was reached within 72 hours. The ultimatum represented culmination of systematic pressure that had eliminated every alternative except acceptance of comprehensive accountability or facing maximum criminal penalties through jury trial that would likely result in conviction based on overwhelming evidence our investigation had compiled. Catherine's recognition that continued resistance would produce more severe consequences than negotiated resolution marked fundamental shift in her strategic position. Rebecca Torres convened the emergency negotiation session at her Atlanta office, with all parties participating either in person or through secure video conference to ensure comprehensive discussion of final terms that would resolve Catherine's criminal exposure while achieving justice objectives our case had been designed to accomplish. Catherine appeared emotionally exhausted but mentally competent during the negotiation session, suggesting that professional counseling she had received was helping her process the reality of facing serious legal consequences for systematic deception she had implemented during my deployment. Her demeanor indicated genuine recognition that her conduct had been fundamentally wrong, rather than merely unfortunate circumstances that had spiraled beyond her control. Jennifer Walsh opened the discussion by acknowledging that her client was prepared to accept responsibility for her role in systematic fraud and conspiracy, while requesting final modifications to cooperation terms that would address her mental health needs and financial limitations, without reducing the core accountability that legal proceedings were designed to achieve. The modified cooperation proposal Catherine's attorney presented included acceptance of all criminal liability components that required comprehensive guilty plea to conspiracy charges, detailed testimony about her decision-making processes, and participation in educational initiatives designed to protect military families from exploitation. Her proposal also accepted civil restitution obligations totaling $50,000 to be paid through structured settlement over 36 months. However, Catherine requested modifications to professional restrictions that would allow gradual restoration of social media influence activities after completing community service obligations and demonstrating sustained rehabilitation through mental health treatment and victim advocacy work. Her proposal included commitment to disclose criminal conviction to business partners while avoiding permanent prohibition on commercial activities that represented her primary source of income. James Morrison reviewed Catherine's modified proposal during recess period before responding that her acceptance of criminal and civil accountability addressed the essential justice objectives, while her requested modifications to professional restrictions were reasonable, provided they included meaningful rehabilitation requirements and ongoing monitoring to ensure compliance with disclosure obligations. Rebecca Torres concurred that Catherine's proposal represented genuine acceptance of responsibility while providing framework for eventual restoration of earning capacity that would not undermine deterrent effect our case was designed to achieve. The modifications would allow Catherine to rebuild her career through honest disclosure rather than creating permanent economic punishment that might generate resentment without corresponding rehabilitation benefits. Sarah Chen expressed concern that modified professional restrictions might be insufficient to protect future business partners from entering relationships with someone who had demonstrated willingness to engage in systematic deception for personal benefit. However, she acknowledged that ongoing monitoring and disclosure requirements could address these concerns while providing Catherine with opportunity to demonstrate genuine rehabilitation. After comprehensive discussion, our legal team reached consensus that Catherine's modified cooperation proposal satisfied legal requirements while providing appropriate balance between accountability and rehabilitation that would serve both justice and prevention objectives. The agreement would require immediate implementation with strict monitoring to ensure compliance with all terms and conditions. The final cooperation agreement Catherine accepted included several components that addressed criminal exposure, civil liability, professional restrictions, and educational obligations in comprehensive manner, designed to achieve multiple objectives simultaneously, while providing clear framework for her transition from defendant to contributor in efforts to protect military families. Criminal accountability included guilty plea to conspiracy charges with suspended sentence contingent on successful completion of probation period, including community service, restitution payments, and participation in educational initiatives. The suspended sentence would become active if Catherine violated any terms of her cooperation agreement, ensuring continued incentive for compliance with all obligations. Civil liability would be resolved through restitution payments totaling $50,000 distributed over 36 months, with additional penalties for late payments and provision for acceleration of full balance if Catherine failed to maintain payment schedule. The structured settlement would provide immediate financial accountability while allowing Catherine to meet obligations through sustained effort rather than requiring resources she did not possess. Professional restrictions included mandatory disclosure of criminal conviction to all existing and future business partners, prohibition on representing herself as relationship advisor or family counselor through commercial activities, an agreement to participate in ongoing monitoring of social media content to ensure compliance with disclosure obligations and prevention of deceptive marketing practices. Educational obligations required Catherine to provide detailed recorded testimony about psychological manipulation techniques she had used to exploit family relationships and military deployment circumstances, participate in development of prevention materials for military families, and complete specified hours of community service with organizations that support military personnel and their families. The cooperation agreement also included mental health treatment requirements that would address underlying psychological factors that had contributed to her willingness to engage in systematic deception while providing professional support for managing accountability and rebuilding relationships with family members who had been affected by her conduct. Catherine's acceptance of comprehensive cooperation terms marked successful conclusion of legal strategy that had achieved complete accountability for systematic betrayal, while creating educational resources that would help protect other military families from similar exploitation. Her transformation from resistant defendant to cooperative participant demonstrated effectiveness of sustained legal pressure combined with reasonable opportunity for rehabilitation. The formal signing ceremony for Catherine's cooperation agreement took place in the district attorney's office with all parties present to witness final resolution of criminal charges and civil liability that had resulted from her decision to betray family trust and exploit military deployment circumstances for personal benefit. During the signing ceremony, Catherine provided brief statement acknowledging responsibility for her conduct and expressing genuine remorse for harm she had caused to family relationships and military service obligations that deserved respect and protection, rather than exploitation and betrayal. "I understand that my choices were fundamentally wrong and caused serious harm to my sister who was serving our country overseas," Catherine stated, her voice carrying emotion that appeared genuine rather than performative. "I accept full responsibility for systematic deception I participated in, and commit to fulfilling every obligation included in this cooperation agreement." The statement represented significant departure from defensive posture Catherine had maintained throughout most of legal proceedings, suggesting that sustained pressure and professional counseling had helped her develop genuine understanding of wrongfulness of her conduct, rather than merely strategic recognition that continued resistance would produce worse consequences. James Morrison expressed satisfaction that criminal case had achieved comprehensive accountability while providing educational resources that would serve prevention objectives for military families who might face similar exploitation attempts in the future. The cooperation agreements with both defendants had transformed individual cases into broader educational opportunity with lasting impact beyond immediate justice objectives. Rebecca Torres emphasized that successful resolution demonstrated effectiveness of systematic legal strategy that addressed criminal, civil, professional, and family dimensions simultaneously, rather than pursuing isolated remedies that might achieve limited objectives while allowing perpetrators to avoid comprehensive accountability for their systematic deception. Sarah Chen noted that financial restitution obligations would provide meaningful compensation for documented damages, while punitive components would serve deterrent effect that extended beyond immediate case to influence behavior of potential future offenders who might consider targeting military families during deployment periods. The comprehensive resolution achieved through cooperation agreements represented successful application of military strategic thinking to civilian legal proceedings, demonstrating that systematic pressure across multiple fronts could force accountability that conventional litigation approaches might fail to achieve within reasonable timeframes and resource constraints. The educational materials developed through cooperation testimony would provide lasting benefit for military families by helping them recognize warning signs of exploitation attempts and understand resources available for prevention and response when family members or trusted individuals attempted to take advantage of deployment circumstances. The case had also established legal precedent that systematic deception targeting military personnel during deployment would result in serious criminal charges, substantial civil liability, and professional consequences severe enough to serve as effective deterrent for potential future offenders who might view military families as vulnerable targets for exploitation. Most importantly, the successful resolution had demonstrated that military personnel and their families possessed access to legal resources and strategic capabilities that could achieve comprehensive accountability for betrayal and exploitation, sending clear message that military service created protection rather than vulnerability when family members or partners attempted domestic fraud and conspiracy. The transformation of personal betrayal into educational opportunity that would help protect other military families represented achievement that extended beyond individual justice to create lasting positive impact for military community members who faced similar risks during deployment periods when they were separated from immediate family support systems and legal resources. The implementation of the cooperation agreements marked the beginning of a transformative phase that would extend the impact of our legal victory beyond individual accountability to create lasting protection for military families across the nation. The educational initiatives emerging from David and Catherine's testimony represented an unprecedented opportunity to develop comprehensive prevention resources based on actual case evidence, rather than theoretical scenarios that might lack practical application. Rebecca Torres coordinated with military family advocacy organizations to establish formal partnership for developing educational materials that would address specific vulnerability patterns our case had revealed. The Military Family Protection Initiative, as it became known, represented collaboration between civilian legal expertise and military support organizations that possess direct access to families who might benefit from enhanced awareness about exploitation risks during deployment periods. The initiative's development process began with comprehensive analysis of testimony and evidence compiled during our legal proceedings, focusing on identifying specific warning signs, manipulation techniques, and exploitation patterns that could be recognized and addressed by military families before systematic deception could cause irreparable harm to relationships and financial security. David's cooperation testimony provided detailed documentation of psychological manipulation strategies that had been used to exploit his emotional vulnerability during my deployment. His recorded statements revealed systematic process through which Catherine had identified and exploited his concerns about maintaining long-distance relationship, while gradually convincing him that their connection represented more natural compatibility than his commitment to me. The testimony included specific examples of how Catherine had used family access and trust to gather information about our relationship challenges, identify moments when David felt particularly isolated or uncertain, and provide emotional support that gradually transformed into romantic attraction through carefully orchestrated progression that seemed natural rather than manipulated. David's detailed account of financial deception included comprehensive explanation of how joint assets had been diverted to support his relationship with Catherine through systematic coordination that avoided detection by utilizing normal expense patterns and timing that would not immediately alert financial institutions or family members about suspicious activity. His testimony also documented the psychological pressure and guilt that had maintained their deception once it was established, including specific conversations about how revelation of their affair would devastate family relationships and destroy my trust in people who were supposed to provide support during military deployment challenges. Catherine's cooperation testimony addressed different aspects of the systematic deception, focusing on family manipulation techniques and exploitation of military deployment circumstances that had created opportunities for conducting affair while maintaining facade of sisterly support and family loyalty. Her recorded statements provided detailed description of how she had used family gatherings and communication to gather intelligence about my relationship satisfaction, deployment stress levels, and emotional needs that David might not be meeting effectively due to distance and military obligations that limited our ability to maintain consistent, intimate connection. Catherine's testimony revealed systematic process through which she had positioned herself as neutral family member who could provide objective perspective about relationship challenges while secretly working to undermine my confidence in David's commitment and his confidence in our long-term compatibility. The educational value of her testimony extended to documentation of how she had exploited military deployment protocols and communication limitations to facilitate private relationship with David, while preventing discovery through careful coordination of schedules, locations, and family interactions that maintained plausible explanations for her presence and involvement in his daily life. The Military Family Protection Initiative used this comprehensive testimony to develop educational modules that addressed specific phases of deployment exploitation, from initial vulnerability assessment through systematic manipulation and eventual cover-up strategies that prevented immediate detection of betrayal and fraud. The first educational module focused on pre-deployment preparation that would help military families recognize potential vulnerabilities and establish protective protocols that could prevent exploitation by family members, friends, or community members who might view deployment as opportunity for inappropriate relationship development or financial manipulation. This module included practical guidance about financial account management, communication security, family boundary establishment, and support system verification that would create protective barriers against systematic deception while maintaining necessary flexibility for legitimate family assistance and emotional support during deployment periods. The second module addressed ongoing deployment monitoring that would help military personnel and their families maintain awareness about relationship dynamics and family interactions through systematic communication protocols and verification procedures that could identify concerning patterns before they developed into systematic betrayal or fraud. The monitoring guidance included specific warning signs that might indicate inappropriate relationship development, financial irregularities that could suggest unauthorized access to shared resources, and family dynamic changes that might reflect manipulation or exploitation attempts by individuals who are using deployment circumstances to pursue personal agenda. The third module focused on response protocols for military families who discovered evidence of betrayal or exploitation during deployment, providing comprehensive guidance about legal resources, evidence preservation, family communication strategies, and professional support services that could address both immediate crisis management and long-term recovery planning. The response protocols emphasized importance of systematic documentation, professional legal consultation, and coordination with military support services that possessed expertise in handling deployment-related family crises, while protecting service members' ability to maintain operational effectiveness and security clearance requirements. The educational initiative also included specialized training materials for military family readiness groups, chaplains, and support personnel who provided services to military families during deployment periods. These materials focused on recognition of exploitation warning signs and appropriate intervention strategies that could prevent systematic deception from causing serious harm, while maintaining respect for family privacy and individual autonomy. The training materials addressed complex ethical considerations about balancing family support with appropriate boundaries, recognizing when family assistance crossed into inappropriate involvement, and providing resources for family members who discovered evidence of exploitation or betrayal by trusted individuals who had used deployment circumstances to facilitate harmful conduct. Implementation of the educational initiative began with pilot programs at 3 military installations that possessed diverse demographic characteristics and deployment patterns that would allow comprehensive testing of materials across different family structures and military specializations that might present varying vulnerability patterns. The pilot programs included structured feedback mechanisms that would allow continuous refinement of educational content based on actual user experience and effectiveness measurements that could demonstrate prevention impact and identify areas requiring additional development or modification to achieve optimal protection for military families. Fort Braxton was selected as the primary pilot location due to my personal connection to the installation and the legal case that had generated the educational materials. The installation's leadership expressed strong support for the initiative based on recognition that military families represented valuable resources that deserve protection from exploitation by individuals who would take advantage of service obligations to pursue personal benefit. The pilot program implementation included mandatory briefings for deploying personnel and their families, voluntary participation in extended educational workshops, and ongoing availability of consultation services for families who identified concerning patterns or needed guidance about appropriate response strategies. Initial feedback from pilot program participants indicated high levels of appreciation for practical guidance that addressed specific vulnerability patterns rather than general warnings about maintaining vigilance during deployment periods. Families reported that detailed case examples helped them understand subtle manipulation techniques that might not be immediately recognizable as exploitation attempts. Military personnel expressed particular value for financial protection protocols that provided systematic approaches to monitoring shared accounts and resources while maintaining necessary access for legitimate family needs during deployment periods when direct oversight might be limited by operational requirements and communication constraints. Family members reported increased confidence about recognizing inappropriate relationship development and understanding appropriate boundaries for support activities that could maintain family loyalty while avoiding situations that might facilitate exploitation or betrayal by individuals who sought to take advantage of deployment circumstances. The educational initiative also attracted attention from civilian organizations that worked with military families, including veterans groups, military spouse organizations, and community support networks that recognized the broader applicability of prevention strategies for protecting vulnerable individuals from systematic exploitation by trusted family members or community connections. The success of initial pilot programs led to expansion planning that would make educational materials available to military families across all service branches and installation locations. with customization options that could address specific deployment patterns and family structures that might present unique vulnerability considerations. The expansion process included development of online training platforms that could reach military families in remote locations, or specialized assignments that might not have access to comprehensive in-person educational programs, ensuring that prevention resources would be available regardless of geographic location or military assignment characteristics. The transformation of our legal case into comprehensive educational initiative represented achievement that extended far beyond individual justice to create lasting protection for military families who deserved security and support rather than exploitation and betrayal during periods when they were serving national security interests through personal sacrifice and family separation. The transformation of personal betrayal into institutional change reached its culmination 18 months after the initial discovery of David and Catherine's systematic deception. The Military Family Protection Initiative had evolved from an experimental pilot program into a comprehensive prevention framework that was being implemented across all service branches, establishing new standards for protecting military families from exploitation during deployment periods. The Department of Defense formally adopted the educational materials and prevention protocols that had emerged from our legal case, recognizing them as essential components of family readiness programs that would enhance military effectiveness by protecting service members from domestic exploitation that could compromise operational security and individual performance. The official adoption represented unprecedented transformation of individual legal proceedings into policy initiatives that would benefit thousands of military families annually. Rebecca Torres received formal recognition from the Judge Advocate General Corps for her innovative approach to civilian-military legal cooperation that had demonstrated how systematic application of legal pressure could achieve comprehensive accountability while generating resources that served broader community protection objectives. Her recognition included appointment to advisory positions that would help develop future initiatives addressing military family protection and civil-military legal coordination. James Morrison's work on the criminal prosecution components received recognition from the National District Attorneys Association for innovative approaches to cooperation agreements that achieved individual accountability while creating educational resources that served broader crime prevention objectives. His case study became standard reference material for prosecutors handling systematic fraud cases involving military families and deployment exploitation. Sarah Chen's development of asset protection protocols and civil remedy frameworks received recognition from military family advocacy organizations for creating practical tools that helped families protect themselves from financial exploitation, while maintaining necessary flexibility for legitimate family assistance during deployment periods. Her protocols were integrated into pre-deployment financial counseling programs across all military installations. The broader recognition of our legal team's work attracted attention from legal education institutions that incorporated our case study into curriculum addressing strategic litigation, multi-jurisdictional cooperation, and civil-military legal coordination. Law schools began using our cooperation agreement framework as exemplary model for achieving comprehensive accountability while serving broader social justice objectives. Military family advocacy organizations reported significant decreases in reported incidents of deployment exploitation following implementation of the educational initiatives, with particular reductions in cases involving systematic financial fraud and family member betrayal during overseas assignments. The prevention impact demonstrated measurable effectiveness of evidence-based educational approaches that addressed specific vulnerability patterns rather than generic warnings about maintaining vigilance. The success metrics included documented improvements in family financial security during deployment periods, enhanced communication protocols that facilitated early detection of concerning patterns, and increased utilization of legal resources by military families who identified potential exploitation attempts before they developed into systematic deception or fraud. The educational initiative also generated unexpected benefits for military readiness and operational effectiveness, as service members reported increased confidence about family security during deployment periods, leading to improved focus on mission requirements and reduced anxiety about domestic vulnerabilities that had previously created distraction and performance concerns. Military commanders reported enhanced unit cohesion and morale as family readiness groups incorporated prevention protocols that created stronger support networks and improved communication between military families and support organizations. The systematic approach to family protection had strengthened military community bonds while reducing individual vulnerability to exploitation attempts. The success of the Military Family Protection Initiative attracted international attention from allied military organizations that recognized the applicability of prevention strategies for protecting military families in different national contexts and deployment scenarios. Several allied nations requested technical assistance for adapting educational materials and prevention protocols to their specific military structures and family support systems. The international recognition led to collaborative development of standardized protection protocols that could be shared among allied military organizations, creating comprehensive framework for protecting military families from exploitation attempts that might occur during multinational operations or extended overseas assignments that involved complex logistics and communication challenges. Catherine completed her cooperation obligations ahead of schedule, demonstrating genuine commitment to rehabilitation and victim advocacy that exceeded minimum requirements established in her agreement. Her participation in educational presentations was consistently rated as highly effective by military family audiences, who appreciated her honest acknowledgement of responsibility and detailed explanation of manipulation techniques that families should recognize and avoid. Her transformation from resistant defendant to effective advocate represented a successful example of how comprehensive accountability combined with appropriate rehabilitation support could generate positive outcomes that served both justice and prevention objectives. Her ongoing participation in victim advocacy work demonstrated sustained commitment to making amends for her conduct while helping protect others from similar exploitation. David completed his cooperation obligations while successfully rebuilding his career through honest disclosure, and demonstrated commitment to ethical conduct that restored confidence among employers and professional colleagues. His participation in educational initiatives was particularly valuable for helping military spouses and partners understand vulnerability patterns and protective strategies from the perspective of someone who had experienced manipulation and exploitation firsthand. His professional recovery demonstrated that comprehensive accountability did not necessarily require permanent career destruction when defendants accepted responsibility and demonstrated genuine commitment to rehabilitation and community service. His example provided hope for other individuals who faced similar legal consequences while emphasizing that accountability was prerequisite for any meaningful rehabilitation effort. The family relationships that had been damaged by David and Catherine's betrayal underwent gradual healing process that was facilitated by their comprehensive accountability and ongoing participation in victim advocacy work. While trust required substantial time and effort to rebuild, their demonstrated commitment to making amends created foundation for eventual restoration of family bonds that had been severely damaged by their systematic deception. Our parents expressed pride in the educational initiative that had emerged from the crisis while acknowledging the difficulty of processing Catherine's conduct and the necessity of legal accountability that had forced her transformation from perpetrator to advocate. Their support for both justice and rehabilitation demonstrated family values that prioritized truth and responsibility over false harmony that might have enabled continued harmful behavior. The personal healing process for my own recovery from betrayal was significantly enhanced by the knowledge that individual suffering had been transformed into resources that would protect other military families from experiencing similar exploitation. The educational initiative provided meaning and purpose that transcended personal justice, while demonstrating that individual resilience could generate broader community benefits. My continued service as JAG Corps attorney was enriched by expertise gained through the legal proceedings and educational initiative development. The experience provided unique perspective on civil-military legal coordination and systematic approaches to achieving accountability that served both individual justice and broader social protection objectives. The professional recognition and career advancement that resulted from the successful case outcome included opportunities to participate in policy development and legal education initiatives that would help other military attorneys develop capabilities for addressing complex cases involving military family exploitation and systematic fraud during deployment periods. The completion of the legal proceedings and successful implementation of educational initiatives represented transformation of personal crisis into professional achievement that demonstrated how military legal training could be applied to civilian contexts, while serving broader objectives that protected vulnerable military families from exploitation and betrayal. The ongoing impact of the Military Family Protection Initiative continues to generate measurable benefits for military families, while establishing legal precedents that deter systematic exploitation of deployment circumstances for personal benefit. The case study remains standard reference for legal professionals, military family advocates, and policymakers who seek to understand effective approaches to preventing and addressing exploitation of military families. The transformation of David and Catherine's betrayal into comprehensive educational resources that protect thousands of military families annually represents achievement that extends far beyond individual justice to create lasting positive impact for military community members who deserve protection and support rather than exploitation during periods when they are serving national security interests through personal sacrifice. The legacy of justice established through systematic legal strategy and innovative cooperation agreements demonstrates that military personnel and their families possess access to resources and capabilities that can achieve comprehensive accountability for betrayal while transforming individual suffering into community protection that serves broader social justice objectives. The success of this approach provides blueprint for future cases involving systematic exploitation of military families, while demonstrating that individual resilience combined with professional expertise can generate outcomes that serve both personal healing and broader community protection in ways that honor military service and strengthen social bonds that support national security through family stability and trust. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.